calling it How I See It Sports Pod. I'm your host, Blake Terrence. Kyle Sullivan, as usual, alongside me. Tonight, we've got a new face in the room. We've got my brother Trent on. Quentin is out of town on vacation with his lovely family, so we got some new faces in the studio. And guys, we are kind of recording at a weird time of the sports, transitioning. You got football kind of settling into the dead part of the off season. You got baseball just revving up. We had the openers in Japan. We're probably not going to do too much baseball tonight. We'll save that until the season actually gets underway in the next pod or two. And then, of course, we got March Madness, which is going into full steam tomorrow as we sit here and record this on the 19th, the night before the morning of the first game. So by the time y'all hear this, some of this basketball analysis might be a little obsolete, as, it could be the end of the first weekend, round of 32 by the time y'all are hearing this. But we're going to go through our brackets a little bit. We're going to talk about some upsets we got in mind, some Cinderellas we like, the potential local spin that very much could come into play here. So, and of course, we've got some new stuff to talk about. We're going to dip our toes into the world of reacting. We've got a couple articles that y'all have probably seen on social medias floating around the TikToks or the Twitters of the world. So we're going to react to a couple stories. One's local, one not so much, but both have been garnering a lot of attention online. So, boys, I think we'll start with the Chiefs because I want to kind of do a little legacy talk. Where do we think Patrick Mahomes sits right now? And then we'll talk about potential here in a minute of where he could get. But, we've got Mahomes now sitting tied with Troy Aikman with 3 Super Bowls. We've got Tom Brady sitting up all alone at 7, of course. We got 2 players tied with 4 Super Bowls. That would be Joe Montana and Terry Bradshaw. And then we've got a big cluster of guys. The source we've been looking at shows 8 with 2. I assume that's a pretty exhaustive, comprehensive list. So, Trent, you're the new guy to the pod. We'll let them hear your voice first. We'll start with you. We can take this a number of different directions, but the main question I have is, that's the little bit of context I'll provide to start with. Where would you say Mahomes is, though, in relation on that list? Is he closer to Brady, or is he closer to the guys that people tend to jumble up in that 2 through 10-ish list of all time?
I think right now he sits in a very unique position as squarely number 2. You can look at him, he's slightly behind Bradshaw and Montana in Super Bowl wins, but when you start comparing eras, Mahomes already has more pass attempts in his career than Bradshaw did in his entire career. He's not even a decade in. You can't compare quarterbacks across era. So
yeah,
I think Mahomes sits in a unique position where in a few more successful seasons, he will put himself in a square number 2 position. However, I think he is still closer to the 2 through 10 than he is to Brady at 1, just from the longevity aspect and the overall Super Bowl rings aspect.
Kyle, what you got?
I'm afraid to be pulling out too many stats here like Trenton. Last week I got Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams mixed up. I even wrote it down here on paper right before we started recording, so I didn't do it again. This were
honestly, those are pretty forgivable guys to mix up, though. Same initials, same position. They're kind of even the same build, like, taller corners, same draft.
At least I didn't say Justin Watson get the wide receiver.
Yeah. The worst was when we had Damian Williams at running back. Damian and Darrell Williams at running back, and then Damian Wilson at linebacker, all at the same time on that first Super Bowl team.
Well, I'm thinking one day when we get to the big time and we're on ESPN like PTI, we'll have Tony Reale coming in at the end cleaning up all our errors. But I'd have to agree with Trent. I think he sits squarely at number 2 behind Tom Brady. Call it a little bit to do with maybe our age, maybe recency bias, maybe hometown bias. I think it's just this unique spot where dynasties going back to back like this are rare. And then when you have those conversations, the reason it feels Tom Brady so far away is just because of what a crazy run he kind of had at the end of his career. Age, what did you say, 37 to 42? He just had kind of this crazy run. But when it comes to the best start of a career ever, what Mahomes has had between personal success and team success, I don't think we've ever seen anything like it. And you would think that would put him on pace to make him easily the GOAT, but just kind of what Brady was able to do in the late stage of his career, you almost just assume that that's not something you can replicate, but time will tell on it.
Well, and I mean, Brady won, we got this 8-way tie. This is pretty much only including guys that actually played pretty much their whole career in the Super Bowl era. So, Trent made a point in the prep talk about how guys like Johnny Unitas, there was another guy that I barely had heard of that he mentioned. Who was that, Trent?
It was Earl Morrall, but most of his rings are backup rings, so.
Right. And like a lot of those guys, Curly Lambeau is another example, guys who would have more championships if they were in the Super Bowl era. But, you already made the point of how you can't compare across even decades, let alone pre-Super Bowl era. So we're going to keep it in that context. But, Brady won as many Super Bowls as those 8 guys with 2. He won 2 in his 40s. So, yeah, it is a unique element. And, part of the reason that he did so much of that damage late in his career is that they had that big gap. The Patriots, they always talk about how the Patriots essentially had 2 dynasties, with Brady and Belichick really being the only things in common, with the, 8-10 year gap in between. So, you both seem to be in agreement that he's pretty firmly at number 2. What's the narrative arc? What has to happen if we say, Mahomes is relatively unlikely to play into his 40s, he turns 30 later this year. So if he's been in the league 8 years, really only 7 that count because his rookie year didn't really play. So if we say he's, more or less halfway through his career, especially the effective part of his career, because, be 36 at that point, assuming that he doesn't follow the Brady arc, which is a strange one, and nobody has that kind of success at that age, what needs to happen in the next 7-8 years? The half of Mahomes' career we assume peak Mahomes is left in order for him to reach Brady. Does he? I personally don't think. I don't think I've weighed in with an opinion in all this yet. I don't personally think he has to get to 7 in order to make an argument. Of course, these are all subjective, right? But I don't think he has to get to 7 before you can make an argument that he's surpassed Brady. So, do you guys think it's purely on the number of rings? What do you need to see, Trent? What do you need to see in the next, say, 7-8 years, at the time he's already been in the league? If we divide that in 2, what do you need to see to put him at Brady's level?
Assuming he doubles where he's currently at, just in terms of years played, so he plays 8 more years, he would have 10 Super Bowl appearances and 6 Super Bowl rings. So,
which Brady has 10 and 7.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
I think if he gets to that point, in my mind, just from a hometown and a recency bias, I could easily put him at or above Brady levels. To convince the average NFL spectator in New York, it might take a little more. But for me, I think that would be enough to get Mahomes to the level of GOAT talk that Brady currently sits in. I don't think MVPs will have much of an impact. The whole MVP conversation in NFL quarterback talks has kind of gone out the window. They're thought about completely separate than rings, and that's just kind of the ring culture that has been built around sports talk and sports viewership. So I think it would take doubling everything that he's currently done for the next 8 years.
And I think before Kyle goes, I think the reason for that is because it's a quarterback award, right? You're competing against a very small field. If you're a quarterback at your peak, you've got a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 shot every year to win the MVP, no matter what your name is. So I would say I agree. I think that's the main underlying cause of that is it's a QB exclusive award essentially at this point. And, we usually, I don't know odds off the top of my head, certainly not historical odds, but I highly doubt there's more than 4 or 5 players with any sort of realistic odds in any of the betting websites before any given season at this point. So yeah, I think you're right about that. Kyle, what's he got to do to get into the Brady level?
Yeah, I think MVPs are kind of a weird way to weigh it now too. I think like you said, we've kind of modern era. We no longer give that award away to anyone that's a quarterback. So or that isn't a quarterback. So even looking at MVPs is a little tough. I think the conversation you start to get into is no, he doesn't have to get to 7, but you can start counting Super Bowl appearances, AFC title games, because when you start to look at the next 5, 6 years of Brady's career, you start to see where they had to have their playoff struggles there, where they were missing getting to the Super Bowl, they were missing getting to the AFC title game in a few instances. Even if you're looking at the first 7, you almost wonder if Mahomes' hot start almost hurts his narrative a little bit, like he got punished for getting to the AFC title game his very first year as a starter. He putting the whole team on his back because he lost to Brady. So now that's one that kind of dings his legacy. First, you can make the argument, would it have been better for him to have just lost the round before that? So you don't have that Brady head-to-head, because that's what will happen is at the end of his career, even if Mahomes makes more Super Bowls, has more impressive numbers in the playoffs, I think let's say he finishes with 5 rings. I think there's a decent chance you're going to say he's got less rings and he's 0-2 against Brady in the head-to-heads. Even though that's a whole nother rabbit hole conversation. Quarterbacks don't play quarterbacks; they play defenses. So, but I think that's how you do it. There is just sustained playoff success, because that's where Brady had a big gap in his career where he wasn't threatening to win Super Bowls.
Well, it's funny because that was going to be kind of the next thing I touched on is, where do we think the head-to-head factors in? I feel like you could take that any way you want, right? Like you could say, well, if Mahomes gets to 5 or 6, that's extra meaningful in comparing him to Brady because that means he got to as many or more than Brady because Brady actively prevented him from a couple of them. But then you could also imagine somebody saying that because Brady has essentially taken 2 rings from him, I mean, both times that Brady beat him, Brady won a ring that year, right? I mean, one of them was in the Super Bowl itself, and then the one before that, they went on to beat the Rams. So then you could say that, Mahomes has an even higher mountain to climb because he essentially has to overcome both the sheer number, the counting, and then the head-to-head narrative. So which one would you guys go with? Would you go with, well, it's even more impressive because it means he's probably made as many or more Super Bowls if he gets there, or does the head-to-head, which way would you take the head-to-head? Does that help or hurt Mahomes' case?
I think it can only hurt it. You still have to evaluate it as, quarterbacks don't play quarterbacks. That's my opinion. I know that's not how things get remembered, 2 years even after the fact, let alone 10, 15. But I just think back to Brady's career. What do you think his best Super Bowl ever was? It was the one where he lost to Nick Foles. He did everything he could as a
His best
starter.
in-game Super Bowl
Yeah,
performance. I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay.
and he had one of his worst games ever against the Rams, and they still had to find an excuse to give the MVP to an offensive player. So I think they gave that to Julian Edelman there. So
Yep.
and to his credit though, he did have a great Super Bowl in that blowout win against the Chiefs during his tenure with the Bucs. But I think it's you really just have to look at individual performances, and that's where I'm afraid the nuance does get lost. There's really no great way to defend Mahomes' performance against the Eagles. He just seemed off. Like there was never really the fight in him like there was in the Tampa Super Bowl. So it's a lot of nuance. It's just going to be interesting how I think maybe our opinions change on it over time as well, looking back.
My fun excerpt to add to that comment is, if head-to-head mattered, Eli would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer this year.
Touche.
However, that obviously did not happen. So, while I think the media picks up on head-to-head a lot, I think true football knowers see that head-to-head is a little bit overblown, and quarterback does play a defense in the end.
Right. Well, and it's funny you mentioned the Eli thing because but those are the Manning brothers are two of the eight that are tied with two Super Bowls, and so you know if all you knew was that basic stuff, you'd look at them and say like, oh, they must have just been two brothers, identical players, and yet couldn't be much different in their resumes other than that. So now, I think we don't want to spend a whole lot more time on this. I think we want to spend probably the bulk of our time on March Madness today. I have this angle I want to talk about on this real quick, though, before we move on. What do we think about the concept of how much weight we put behind what led up to Super Bowls? Right, because like that, I mean, we're already talking about how we lose nuance in these conversations we're keeping a pretty 30,000-foot view here. Like how much do narratives like the fact that Mahomes has never fallen short of the conference championship games help him? How much does it help that, he has, essentially lost he's lost the same number of playoff games to NFC teams as he has AFC teams. You have narratives like Brady, who with all the Super Bowls he won, and Mahomes, I suppose you could say the same thing about 2020, but their best teams, the best whole season teams they had, both fell short. So, the narratives of, what led up to the Super Bowls or what they did in their years that they did not win Super Bowls. The Patriots, I think the only year they actually missed the playoffs was the year Brady got hurt and Matt Castle, old friend alert, filled in. I mean, I think they won 10 or 11 games that year, but they missed the playoffs. How much does, what led up to the Super Bowls or the rest of the context of their careers come into play? I mean, I'm not even necessarily saying, I think they're pretty close in that narrative. I mean, again, it's not like Brady had a bunch of terrible seasons and then just got hot, but like, Mahomes probably still has the slight edge, right? Because I mean, again, the conference championship game is his floor right now.
For the conference championship.
There you go, yeah. So I mean, we couldn't possibly get into what we think is going to happen on that front. How each given season is going to end in the future, but for the holistic part of the debate, how much does that stuff matter? What they did when they didn't win, and their general arcs of narratives. Does that matter in the GOAT discussion, or do we have to keep it at rings and appearances, and that's about it?
I think it's going to have to for Mahomes because of the head-to-head situation. Not saying that's right. There's a similar argument to be made there for LeBron versus MJ, the level of consistency. LeBron had year over year. There's a lot of parallels there. And then this is somewhat on topic here still, but it's kind of an interesting point. I know Nick Wright, Kansas City guys, talked about it before, but how do you look back at this most previous season? I think everyone agrees it was a defensive-driven team, but when you look at postseason awards, Mahomes wasn't getting called the best quarterback. Andy Reid wasn't getting talked for Coach of the Year. You didn't have Trent McDuffie getting all-pro considerations. It's just kind of going to be a weird year, I think, historically to look back at, to get to a Super Bowl and get blown out. But at the end of the day, how are some of these teams, like you said, are going to be remembered? You could say the same thing about the one loss. Effectively, there were one loss teams that lost the Super Bowl sitting the last week of the season. But how do you think historically these teams even get remembered?
Yeah, and you make a decent point about the blowouts too. I mean, that's another layer of context added into. Some people will probably want to factor in that. Mahomes has really never dominated a Super Bowl, right? I mean, like the first one, they won by double digits, but they were of course down. I don't think they had the lead until they took the lead, if that makes any sense. Late in the fourth quarter, and then they won the last two essentially at the buzzer, and then his two losses, he's been pretty thoroughly dominated. So that's another layer of context to add to it. Anyway, Trent, how much do you think any of that stuff even matters, though?
I think the one-liner stat help protect your legacy after you're done playing, but I don't think they help cement your legacy. So when you think about as Kyle kind of brought up, the Jordan thing, 6-0 in the final. So when you think about, as Kyle kind of brought up, the Jordan thing, 6-0 in the finals. Anytime you talk about Jordan versus LeBron, any Jordan fan instantly goes 6-0 in the finals. And if for Mahomes, it's his entire career, he never lost before the AFC Championship game, yeah, that's a one-line stat that cements your legacy. But in the middle of a career, it's kind of hard to establish that and and provide that as a fact because it's still open-ended. So I think it's kind of hard for that to be what will drive him over Brady. But I do think if he reaches to a similar place as Brady or surpasses Brady, that will help against the next generation of quarterbacks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and it gets into another. I mean, I think Mahomes would have to essentially, he would have to keep that as his floor for this to even be relevant. But I mean, to your point, like I don't. Yeah, like the Jordan thing, the 6-0 in the finals. I mean, that's great, but like losing a championship game or losing a championship series, I mean, in no world should that be regarded as a failure, right? Like I think an appearance should be, I don't know, half as valuable is probably the ceiling, right? It's probably no more than half as valuable, probably more like a third to 40% as valuable as a championship victory. But I mean, yeah, I mean, again, he would have to keep that as his floor because he essentially has to make the championship game of the Super Bowl every year. But I mean, Mahomes still has, like we talked about before, a chance to at least match Brady's sheer number of appearances. If he keeps up the pace he's on, he could even maybe get to an 11th Super Bowl or something like that. And then, if let's say he does keep this pace up of the losing in the championship game is the absolute floor. And if he makes it to 11 Super Bowls, but he goes 6-5. I mean, to me, that is a pretty strong still case to put him above or at least at Brady's level. So, I mean, I have a hard time with the record keeping of how we did in the championship because, I mean, we say championship or bust, but making the championship should at least carry a certain portion of the value that winning a championship does, wouldn't you say?
I think it has to, even when you consider, I think, even a lot of people are probably going to say Eagles are the favorite. I haven't looked at the odds. I'm sure that's where Vegas has it. I think AFC is by far and away the better conference, and everyone would tell you that. So just making that appearance there and having like a floor of, competency, I think it adds a lot to the legacy. It'll mean more if it can carry on through the next 4 to 5 years, because that's what's going to keep happening is you're going to keep getting these side by side. Brady versus Mahomes through year 7, Brady versus Mahomes through year 8, through year 9. So this is where he kind of has a chance to gain some ground here as much as anywhere.
Let's move on. We're going to take a little break here, and then we're going to talk a little March Madness. We're going to look at our brackets. We're going to compare all that, and then we're going to talk about some Cinderella stories as well. So stay tuned to the Calling It How I See It Sports Pod. Back here on the Calling It How I See It Sports Pod, Blake Terrency with you along with my brother Trent and Kyle Sullivan. Let's move on to March Madness. That's what's immediately up in front of us. Sarah, here as we record this, we're about 12 hours or so, 12, 13 hours away from the tip-off of the first games tomorrow. Before we get into any sort of minutia, how was filling out brackets for y'all this year? Kyle, you kind of already told us your answer. Tell the audience what you told Trent and I about your bracket this year.
Well, first of all, March Madness started yesterday for Wichita State, and it also ended one and done in the NIT. So, end of another run there. I thought that's another error I made last week. If we had Tony Reale, he would have corrected me. I said Greg Marshall brought relevant to Wichita State basketball for the first time since the 80s. Skipped the Mark Turgeon era, but that's all right. But I did put as little effort as possible into this bracket this year. Normally, I at least click those little info bubbles on the ESPN. Really,
did you autofill your bracket?
I didn't autofill, but I went off vibes. That's for sure. I definitely went off vibes. So I do expect to do as well as I have in recent years.
Well, that's the beauty of brackets, right? I mean, like the person who went off jersey colors is usually the one that takes home the money. So,
How about
Trent, how
you?
much strategy went into yours?
So I heard an interesting perspective online before I got to my brackets this year, and it was do one with your heart and one with your head. So I went through and did one kind of like Kyle mentioned, which was all vibes based. I was no insight and haven't watched a ton of college basketball this year. And then I went back through, did all my research, and did another one based with my head, which will probably do worse than the vibes one. So we'll see how
Yep,
those
that's how it goes.
pair against each other. But
Yeah, I kind of did like a somewhere in the middle between y'all. So I put in a couple different entries in a specific pool, and I think I probably used a balance of heart and what I had in my head when I first did it. That was Monday or Tuesday, basically as soon as they came available. And then tonight, I went back through my entries and kind of updated it with, like Iowa State, for example. I had them going a little far, based on where I've heard where they're at with injuries. So I eliminated them a little bit earlier. I started reading, probably didn't want to go too far into this, but I started reading a bit about the Cinderella team. So, I bumped up Colorado State and New Mexico a little bit in my pools and such. What was the other? Oh, and then Arkansas, of course, thought they had a pretty decent shot to knock off Kyle's childhood favorite KU, but they're, of course, now out. Their top scorer is now out for the tournament. So I think I did three brackets. I had Arkansas winning in two of them, so I bumped that down to one. Well, you know what? While I'm on this subject, we can transition to what we were going to first really talk about on the matchup potential, because when I put KU in a second one over Arkansas, I went ahead and messed with that bracket a little bit and ended up creating the Sweet 16 Mizzou KU matchup that could theoretically take place. It would require Mizzou to upset Texas Tech as the 3 seed, and it would require KU as the 7 to upset St. John's, who I have making the national championship game in a different bracket. So certainly I've got some brackets all over the place. The likelihood seems relatively low. It would be a 6-7 matchup in the Sweet 16, but there is potential for what I believe would be the first ever meeting between the two schools in NCAA tournament history. I think I was listening to my guy Seren Petro, whose show I used to be on at Sports Radio 810 here in KC, and I think they dropped the stat nugget on there that this is only the second time they've ever been even in the same region, for logical reasons when they were in the same conference. You guys actually think there's any chance they both make it to the Sweet 16? Kyle, you probably have the best KU perspective. Do you give them any shot? Well, first of all, how are you feeling about Arkansas now that we know their top scorer is out, but do you give them any shot in general to make it that far?
Can't say that I feel good about it. I will say it is interesting. This Arkansas game's a little bit of a rematch. So they actually played Arkansas in an exhibition game. I think Bill Self, little nod to a friend Calipari to have an exhibition game with a new job, and really kind of a flipped scenario there. Arkansas ended up blowing KU out, but KU didn't have Hunter Dickinson in the time. So a flip scenario. I wouldn't be shocked if they went out in round one, but it does seem like that's their ceiling. I got St. John's going really far, winning the whole thing. Spoiler alert.
Winning the whole thing.
Yeah,
Wow. I think I have them in the championship game in one of them, but I don't have them as the my champions. For the record of my three, I might be the only one who's filled out multiple. Well, Trent might have. Anyway, my three champions are Florida, Duke, and Bama.
yeah.
So I've got 2 1s and a 2.
They're
That's
kind
my
of in that
prediction.
same boat as Duke. They're in the Big East, which isn't any good anymore, in the same way that the ACC isn't good anymore. It's on paper they're blowing out everybody that they should. They've got Rick Pitino, great all-time coach. It's just, what do you make of them? It seems like all the good teams are apparently concentrated in the SEC, and that's a whole other talking point there, is what is considered success for the SEC to kind of hold up this reputation. I don't think I've ever seen the media consensus be so strong toward one conference ever in my entire life. But
the
Yeah,
Big Ten is up there, but still trailing the SEC for sure.
I'm faith in St. John's, faith in Duke. I watched Memphis and Derrick Rose play nobody all season long and come right to the cusp of winning a championship. So try to lean on some of the experience with good coaches, good players, and one and done. You just never know. But it does seem, to answer your question in short, KU does have the vibes of a boom or bust team. It's when they play these top tier teams, they've even beaten Duke way earlier in the year. They're always often in these games, and they just find ways to lose them. So wouldn't be a total surprise, but it wouldn't be anything I'd put my money on in terms of them finding their way to the Sweet 16.
Hypothetical for you guys. SEC versus the field for the national championship winner at even money.
Oh, give me the field easy.
Give you the field.
Yeah.
SEC has 2 1 seeds, 2 2 seeds.
2 2s.
And
yep.
Kentucky at a 3.
Yep. And you got Mizzou and Ole Miss at 6s. Oklahoma is Oklahoma an 8 or a 9? They're in an 8-9 matchup. You got Vandy at a 10. Yeah, I mean the SEC had, what did they end up with of the 18? I think they had 14 in the tournament. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think the question, if you're framing it, is you're looking at 4 or 5 SEC teams versus Duke and St. John, and then just always the random chance that no K team ends up pulling it out. So I think the fact that I get 2 other front runners and the field on top of that, I'll take the field. Again, probably not a bet I would make, but it would, if you made me take it, that's the side I'd lean.
That's a tough one. I mean, I love how we're all just like, right, like we've completely ignored Houston, the other 1 seed. We just,
it's fine.
I don't know.
The team having the Final Four, and I just ignored them. But I've seen KU hang with them, so maybe that's why my faith in them has dwindled. But speaking of, a coach that could afford to get over the hump, that Kelvin Sampson build his resume, maybe this is finally the year for him. But
I probably go SEC because of how many are clustered at the top there in that conference. If it was, if it was Florida, Auburn, and then everybody else kind of just clustered in the middle, I'd probably take the field. But I mean, you have 4 teams at 1 or 2 seeds. I like those odds. I mean, I certainly, when I bet, I tend to go for the slightly longer odds pick to try to win a little more. So I'd probably put it on the SEC, especially because, except for Duke, I don't feel like there's been a team. The consensus is, absolutely can win a national championship the way. I mean, I don't think anybody would be surprised about Florida, Auburn, Bama, or Tennessee taking it all. And, I think they're giving them an outside shot, but with the legacy and everything else, I don't think anyone would be all that shocked at Kentucky for that matter.
I feel like the SEC definitely has to get at least one team in the Final Four, maybe 2, and there's going to be some trash talk for sure after all the.
Oh yeah, it'd be bad.
We haven't really addressed the elephant in the room here, Blake, and that's that Drake is the Cinderella story already of the tournament. Everybody's darling. Mizzou gets them first round. How are you guys feeling as the 2 Mizzou alums, the 2 Mizzou guys here at the pod today?
I'll let you.
Trent, you can start. Okay, I'll go first then. All right, so I think there's just as much local Drake bias as there is Mizzou bias. Look, I know Ben McCollum's been a highly respected name for a long time. Maybe maybe I have some pent-up resentment from my college time essentially being a complete shit show in the basketball realm of things because of Kim Anderson. But that's the kind of vibes I sometimes get when
3 losses. He's winning with D2 transfers. McCollum won 4 titles in 5 years. Wasn't Kim Anderson kind of a 1-year wonder out of nowhere at UCM? That's a little.
Oh God, maybe so. I try not to think about him very much.
2019, when he was at Northwest Missouri State, they lost to Duke by like 4. I mean, I don't know. He won't be at Drake long. We'll find out what he looks like as else in the next year or 2. It sounds like, but.
And honestly, my main I respect him. And I mean, it's always cool to see the smaller local Midwest schools. So that's not really my issue. I think honestly, my issue with how the analysis has been of the Cinderella, specifically pertaining to the Mizzou matchup, is, everybody's kind of just assuming that like Drake is, because of the Cinderella win behind them, everybody's kind of assuming that Drake is going to be the team that says how the game's going to go, right? So like, Drake is a very defensive oriented team. They like, they like to win games 65-60. They allowed they had the fewest points allowed in the nation of all the D1 teams, the over 300 that qualify in like the Ken Palm ratings and stuff. And so I think people get fixated on that stuff of like how Drake likes to play, very slow half court offense, very fundamentally sound, doesn't turn the ball over, likes to slow teams down and keep it low scoring. And so that's the problem I have with the analysis, is that because Drake is the Cinderella team, like everything's about how they like to play, right? So it's like they'll slow Mizzou down, they'll prevent Mizzou from getting out in the fast break, which is how Mizzou succeeds. And it's like, okay, but like either could happen, right? And like generally you would tend to, if you have two teams playing each other who have vastly different styles, you tend, I would think, to look at the team with more athleticism and talent as to whose style is going to be the name of the game, right? So like that's the problem I have with the analysis, is that it's been, well, since Drake plays slow, low-scoring offense, or since that's Drake's way of winning, that's going to be a problem for Mizzou. But like the inverse could be true. If Mizzou starts out hot, if they're shooting the ball the way we know they can, if Mark Mitchell inside, a guy who Drake doesn't really have a comparable player for, is doing his thing, he seems to be healthy after his scare in the conference tournament, well, then the opposite could happen, and Drake could start to have to force the game to try to keep up and then play out of their style. So I don't know, like
we talked about,
I'm absolutely expecting a good game. I don't think either team is going to run away with it. But the problem I have with the Cinderella element, specifically as it pertains to this matchup, is that it's that everybody's assuming because Drake is the darling, it's like, well, because of how Drake plays, Mizzou's going to struggle. And I'm like, I just think like you could easily flip that argument. And again, generally the team with more raw athleticism and talent is who sets the style.
I'm really enjoying this because I can tell this has really irritated you. I'm feeling a little bit of like, we were texting before the show, and it feels like a straw man a little bit. This is just March, man. Like every year, everyone picks teams that they want to see win and want to do well. Maybe they end up doing well, maybe not. But I think, as Mizzou basketball fans for so long, you guys are used to kind of being able to play the underdog card. Haven't had a run in a while. It'd be a fun story. And for once, you guys finally have this great year, good quick 1 year turnaround, and you run into everybody's favorite darling before the tournament starts. I think the same thing. I don't think it's crazy to think either team can win. I just think it's very clear who America wants to win.
Like, fun context for your who's going to dictate pace of play and scoring and all that. So their one common opponent on the year is Vanderbilt. Drake played Vanderbilt in November, and they won by 11, but they gave up 70 points. Mizzou played Vanderbilt in January, and they won by...
I think they played them twice, because they lost to them once, too.
Okay. Well, the one they played in January, they gave up 66 points to Vanderbilt. So Drake is all about defense, but gave up more points to the common opponent than Mizzou did. So Drake won or Vanderbilt won? Drake and Mizzou won this game. But
okay,
Drake
put up 80 against Vanderbilt.
Yeah, Drake gave up 70 points, and Mizzou only gave up 66 points.
Okay.
All this
interesting
about Drake's defense going to be stifling is probably not realistic when they're not playing the Bradley Braves 3 times a year.
Yeah. So, I mean, don't disrespect Bradley. That's our favorite team because Bradley, Bucknell, KU knockout tournament
So we look
teams
at
is what we're
04,
referencing there.
04, 05. I can't even remember which year.
Oh man,
But
yeah, it was a long
can't
time
remember
ago.
which. It was Bill Self's. Yeah, his early first 2 years there on the job. Obviously, went uphill after that. But so long ago now, I
Well,
can't flip which was which.
well, no, but yeah, I mean, I think that's the exact point there, Trent. Though, is yeah, like the whole set the pace of play, keep it low scoring. It's a lot easier to do that against the
Teams that aren't
this isn't even
here
really
to
a term
play.
in basketball, but FCS teams than it is the teams. That was a long
Can't
time
remember
ago.
which. It was Bill Self's. Yeah, his early first 2 years there on the job. Obviously, went uphill after that. But so long ago now, I
Well,
can't flip which was which.
well, no, but yeah, I mean, I think that's the exact point there, Trent. Though, is yeah, like the whole set the pace of play, keep it low scoring. It's a lot easier to do that against the
Teams that aren't
this isn't even
here
really a
to
term
play.
in basketball, but FCS teams than it is the teams you're going to be facing in March. And so to take it out of the Mizzou bias, or at least to put it in other context, I think the other thing I find weird about the Drake thing is that like with the other teams, like we can kind of transition here into some of the Cinderellas we do like. For example, um, you know, New Mexico and Colorado State, a 10 and a 12. I don't have brackets directly in front of me, of course, so you guys can fill in the gaps there of what region that is and the matchups. But, those are two of the, and, there's some really strong research behind those. I kind of delved into it. And, Colorado State especially, is a team that just Ken Palm just absolutely loves. And they're, you know, one of the few teams to be, I believe it was in the top 30 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. So, and New Mexico
I believe
finished
Memphis is
very
out
strong.
scorer
Say
right
that
now.
again.
I believe Memphis is out their top scorer right now too. So I think Colorado State might be the Vegas favorite right now as well.
Right.
It's
And
just
like
kind
New Mexico's another example playing, I believe New Mexico faces Marquette in the first round, if I remember that correctly. And New Mexico's another team. They finished the conference very strong and won the I believe the Mountain West would be their conference. Yeah, the Mountain West tournament. Um, so there's a lot of research and the teams being hot that is generally behind some of the Cinderella stuff. Whereas I feel like some of the Drake stuff, just to wrap up that conversation, some of the Drake stuff is guided by like name gravity with Ben McCollum, or they tend to, teams like that do tend to get a bit of a boost in the tournament, to be fair. Trent, I think you're pretty high on VCU as we start talking about some of our under the radar teams that you like. And that's kind of what Drake does, that they play that VCU-ish style of hard nosed defense, not explosive, but very consistent offense. Don't make mistakes. So I mean, I can see it, but I just feel like there's more wind behind some of these other Cinderella stories that than there is with the Drake stuff. So who are some of your guys' other favorites? I have New Mexico beating Marquette in a couple of mine. I don't think I have them doing anything crazy against. I believe that's the Michigan State's region is where they're the two, and then Colorado State. I believe I don't have making it past the second round. I think the only double digit seed that I have it all picked to go past the first weekend is I went pretty hard on UC San Diego in one of the brackets, though I've heard mixed reviews on them. So who are some of y'all's favorite Cinderellas? Or under the radars? They don't even have to be true Cinderellas. I mean, if you think
yeah.
UNC was, underrated all year and just started their championship run last night against San Diego State or something, feel free. But
They're kind of one of those teams where it's unproven coach, no name schedule. It's tough to make. The record's great, but what do you make of them? The one team I took, and it's just purely off of vibes and wanting a good rematch. Was it last year or 2 years ago that Yale beat Auburn? I've got Auburn or Yale beating Texas A&M, and then UC San Diego. That's my chaos side of the bracket. And then getting a rematch with Auburn in the Sweet 16. I don't have them going any further than that. But Ivy Leagues always make the games interesting. They don't often win them. But, if we're going to be stereotypical, they like to play that fundamentally sound game. They're not going to beat
They play
themselves.
smart.
Yeah, they're not going to beat themselves out there. Just a bunch of coaches on the floor, just it's these high IQs, high basketball IQs. So those are always fun games to watch. That sometimes they don't really stand a chance when they walk out there, but they at least make them interesting. So I think that'd be fun to see a Yale Auburn rematch there in the Sweet 16.
I believe the word you're looking for is scrappy.
There's always a nice shooter in the corner with a protractor ready to calculate angles on how to ball in the hoop too. So that's always helpful.
And he cannot be above 5'10".
Exactly.
That's the other rule. So Trent, who are some of your Cinderellas, or where were you going?
I'm really high on the 11 seeds this year, outside of Drake. Let's keep note of that. Mizzou bias all the way. But I like VCU coming out of the East. I think BYU in the first round is winnable, and then 3 and 14 matchups always scare me. So I don't know who's coming out of that Wisconsin-Montana matchup, but VCU is top 30 and a lot of defensive stats coming in, and I think they can stifle some of the weaker offenses. So I'm high on them. And then North Carolina, if they can get past Ole Miss, I think the legacy itself will carry them past an injured Iowa State team. I don't have no double-digit teams going past the Sweet 16, but those are two fun ones I have, making it pretty deep just from how the bracket's set up.
So no double-digit teams making it to the second week. Do you have any in the Sweet 16 at all? You said making it past. Do you have any in the Sweet 16?
Yeah, North Carolina and VCU making it to the.
Oh, okay, that's right. So you did have those both winning.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, it's interesting. Wisconsin, they did get a bit of a tough draw as far as the region, but they're another one of those teams that the analytics groups really love, kind of in that, better talent-wise, of course, but in that Colorado State mold where, they're one of the teams that's, certain analytics sites would tell you they're a bit of a sleeper. One of those few teams that's in the top, 25 area in both offense and defense, and they also shoot the three really well. So, those are kind of things that tend to travel well, if you will, in the NCAA tournament. So I think I've got Wisconsin in the Final Four in one of my brackets coming out of that region.
Can any team that Ken Palm likes really be a sleeper?
I suppose that's a fair point, but then the committees don't tend to value those rankings that highly when seeding. I guess would be my counter to that. So, who do we think is the most vulnerable of the, I guess, if we want to go top, let's just say top, it's 12 to 16. I never know whether to cut off in the elite teams in the 3 or 4 discussion. It's basically the moment you, we'll do it at 4, I guess, because it's the teams that still have the superior matchup in the second round. So of the top 16 teams, who are some of the ones you guys would think are the most vulnerable? We talked a bit about Iowa State with their injury issues. I'm not feeling them going very far. I believe I have Houston out in the second round in at least one of my brackets. Who's that 8-9 matchup in Houston's region?
Gonzaga, Georgia.
Yeah, I believe I have Gonzaga getting to the Sweet 16 in one of my brackets.
Right, they always tend to do well the years they're actually not seeded super high. So that's kind of their pattern. If they get a top 1 or 2 seed, it's a bust. But they have their best.
Yeah, they lost in the second round as a 1 not too long ago, didn't they?
That's how Wichita State got to the Final Four too. Gonzaga was the 1 seed that year. Got them in the 8-9 matchup.
Weakest, I think Purdue is one of the weaker 4s. Arizona's been a little bit all over the place. They have the star power, they have the offensive power, but they're a little inconsistent.
Yeah, Arizona really could lose in the second round, or they could I don't think it's likely, but they could. They have the talent to win the region. So,
yeah, I'm still fascinated by Duke. in St. John's because they're in my head. The SEC or the ACC and the Big East are still good conferences, and that's like a 3-loss team and a 4-loss team. So in my head, people should be taking them more seriously, which is why I have them in the championship. But also, if they ended up losing like in the Sweet 16 or something, it's like, well, we didn't know what they were like. Who are they playing all year? So those are the two that I'm really most interested in.
All right, let's circle back real quick before we move on to our little fun topics, or not so fun in this instance. We kind of touched on the likelihood of Mizzou KU even getting to that, because that's really the narrative that's likely going to mean it doesn't happen. Let's do a little bit of a let's start a fight. Let's talk about what's likely to happen if they do play. First of all, we all know what happened when they played this year. Does that game even carry any? Hypothetically, if this game does come to pass, if they both pull off their second round upsets, does that game even matter at this point?
What do you think, Trenton? I'll let you go first on that.
I think both teams probably look a little different than they did way back when. Kansas had a up and down season for sure, but I think they've I think Self has kind of figured out where they need to play to win games. So I definitely think that matchup would look different than it did back in December. Of course, I think Missouri still pulls it out, but
I do have them in the Elite Eight in the bracket where I called the matchup, where I, basically set up the matchup. I did pick Mizzou to win it.
There you go. Kyle, what are your thoughts?
I think it would have only mattered if one team had like won in blown out fashion, because then you kind of have that mentally hanging over. It's one of those things where KU probably feels like if one or two things they cleaned up or corrected, they could have had. And then the Zoo's got the confidence of, we've beaten this team before. It's nothing we can't repeat. So, again, I don't think this hypothetical matchup happens, but I don't know that the previous matchup carries a ton of weight to it.
Is the
Well, the final score's carrying a ton of weight for you too. There's like, if one team had blown the other out, we won't talk about what happened until the last 5 minutes or so, I guess.
Fair enough.
Is the rivalry still alive enough for there to be bad blood from a game in December, or do we think we're so far removed from that it doesn't?
I think it would bring juice back to the rivalry. Would you guys agree that these last few matchups, this was the first close game we've kind of had, but with it not, having an impact on the conference standings it's part of the transfer portal too, right? Guys move in and out, faces change quicker, so you don't have I've been playing this guy every year for 2-3 years straight, twice a year, but I think it would bring juice back to it if you could even just get the matchup again, because it'd be such a meaningful game versus a non-conference game. Traditionally doesn't just mean as much in college basketball.
Oh, yeah. I think it was a brilliant move to not see them, not that they were, they were relatively close in terms of where they were going to be. See, there was no way they were going to face each other in the first 2 rounds realistically, but I think they scheduled it perfectly to, have the possibility that if they can pull the upsets in the second round, that, then one's basically guaranteed to get to the Elite Eight. I think they nailed the setup there. And yeah, I think that's the way you are going to keep the rivalry going now. I think the fact they're now starting to schedule more games in the regular season with each other on the basketball and football side is great. I think that's going to prevent the rivalry from suffering any more damage than it already has, which is probably pretty extensive. But, obviously that's how you're going to really renew the rivalry or inject life back into it, is for it to be postseason play. Can't do much about that in football. But yeah, I think this is they did about as good a job as they could of. Not that was really, I don't think, anybody's goal at the national level, but this is the perfect scenario to try to put some life back into that rivalry, I would say, for sure.
That's an interesting point. Maybe them playing in football will help just in general. I know 2 different sports, 2 different rosters, different coaches, but because those football games do matter in the non-conference, you just get so few games in football, smaller sample size sport. So maybe just the regularity of playing year after year, that'll help, because ultimately it's fans that really help carry the rivalry, so that could maybe help kind of impact it too.
Trent, anything to add on that? You think this does this does this re-inject life into the rivalry, or is the rivalry kind of in the hands of people who, grew up with it? So,
Yeah,
for us, it's never going to go away, and for the people who didn't grow up with it, it's kind of hard for it to get to that level either. That's the other angle I could see. Where are you at on that?
that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I don't think anyone growing up now feels any bad blood towards each other besides what their parents put onto them and where they want them to go to college. Outside of that, how does a young MU or KU fan have any perspective of what it used to be like back in Allen Fieldhouse or any of the good battles way back when? I think it'll be nice to reinvigorate some rivalry for the younger generation, but I don't think it'll ever get back to where it used to be.
All right. Well, obviously, next time we record, we'll have some actual results to talk through. But we're going to wrap up this segment of March Madness, and we've got a couple little blurb stories that y'all have probably already become familiar with that we just kind of want to chat through, shoot the bull about, give some opinions on. So we're going to take a real quick break, and we'll be back with the wrap-up segment right after this. Boys, we know that sports, they can bring us into realms of things that we may or may not want to talk about that become highly relevant. Whether you've got, cultural and political issues, or you've got some high school drama. So we're going to delve into that. Bear with us. We know not everybody's. We've got different opinions on everything, but this is where it can get a little crazy. So just bear with us. We're not going to be trying to too crazy, but we are going to, we're going to have some fun, and everybody just needs to kind of keep a cool head as we do this. More talking to the audience than y'all, but so we'll start with the local angle here. This is probably the one that you might not have seen as much because it hasn't gone viral on the short form social medias that are most popular, like the TikToks and the shorts, as the second one has. But we'll start here locally in Lawrence, but not with KU. We've got the Haskell Indians Nations College, which is a college for a variety of indigenous tribes, and you've got their head coach of their women's basketball team, we should clarify, who has qualified for the women's NAIA tournament after kind of, putting on a run late in the season. They finished the season 500, but they won they won their conference tournament kind of surprisingly to get an automatic bid. But the real story here is that for the past month or so until this past week, their coach had been coaching for no salary. As I'm sure we all probably know, we have the new Department of Government Efficiency that has come into the federal government, has made a variety of cuts and changes, and one of those involved a lot of different schools and a lot of different places losing a lot of funding sources. And, unfortunately, the head coach, his name is Adam Strong, of the women's basketball team at Haskell Indians Nations College, he was told he was going to be terminated on Valentine's Day of all days. I mean, just crazy stuff. And essentially said, well, I'm not going anywhere because I believe in this team, and coached for no money for about a month until last week when it was reinstated, as multiple tribes are suing the federal government now, saying that they've breached treaties, centuries-old treaties with many of the indigenous tribes. So, when you guys see a story like this, it seems like these stories are generally confined to the smaller schools. If this happens at a D1 school, I don't think that coach is going to just stick around because there's money behind every nook and cranny in those ranks. But, when you guys read a story like this, is this does this pull on more of the inspirational heartstrings for you guys, or is this a slap in the face on current events? And Kyle, for you specifically, working at a smaller college, where does this story like this take you guys? Is it purely inspirational, or is it a little scary for you?
I'm going to choose to take it as inspirational. Obviously working at a community college, that's a little bit different scenario than this. But Haskell has been having a lot of issues. I think I also read they had 8 presidents in 6 years at one point for various reasons, arguments over what level of control the federal government should have over the school. So just to kind of have a feel-good story for the community to rally around, the campus to rally around, I think you try to look at it as a glass half full situation. And almost hopefully ends up kind of being a happy ending. I know it sounded like they were cutting 25% of their workforce. I know their foundation was trying to raise funds to at least temporarily bring staff back. So I'm choosing it short term, at least as a positive story.
Look, I think this would have been a great movie 20 years ago, just from the inspirational aspect. You know how many college athletics stories, Cinderella stories, or
Oh yeah, I mean you could drop this into a Ted Lasso episode or something.
well, that's an option too. But even the fiction, nonfiction movies way back when
Yeah.
would have picked this up right away. Maybe we'll get a Netflix documentary about it as well. But I think it's a good inspiration story. It is obviously not optimal that the coach had to go unpaid and had to stay on as a volunteer amidst budget cuts and just overall all that political environment. But I think it is a good story and kind of sheds light on the close knit environment you see at smaller schools versus D1 schools where something like this probably wouldn't have happened. Now they probably wouldn't have the same issues, but brings to light the difference between big and small universities.
Well, and it's not just big and small schools, but then it's like obviously like from the element of current events, probably the angle that's going to be talked about is how this is you know, a, a Native American school that's allegedly now the federal government might even be in breach of treaties and such. But like, even if you don't want to go that far into it, just from the sports element, it's like it would already be for those reasons a problematic story if this was the men's basketball team, but then it becomes the women's basketball team, and you get into how those tend to get underrepresented and underfunded, and Title IX everything just purely at the sports level at any given
Yeah.
school of any size.
Not just a smaller school too, but yeah, one that's established to benefit an underserved community as is. So.
All right, well let's move on to the second one because it's not as low. All right, so let's move on to our second story here before we wrap up. This one, probably a little more fun to talk about. Still kind of crazy, but more in the drama elements and just some more craziness factor and not as political, not as depressing. Not local either, but quite a story that y'all might have seen going around because it's made the rounds on TikTok and the Facebook shorts of the world that a large majority of the population tends to spend their time on social media wise. Had you guys seen any of the video before I sent you the background of this story tonight? Of in Virginia, there was quite an incident about 2 weeks ago now, a track and field incident. Kyle, you maybe could add some behind the scene context to this story too, having been not in track, I guess, but a cross country runner, a competitive runner. But you had two girls running essentially side by side, and then as one passed the other, the one who was getting past hit her in the head with her baton. And, the reports are that girl suffered a concussion and at least a mild skull fracture, and then the big reactions, if you just kind of stay in that TikTok realm, if you will, is, everybody who happened to run track or whatever in high school is watching this and saying like, the girl tried to go on TV afterward, the one who did the swinging of the baton, and say it was a complete accident. It was just a coincidence of how they passed each other. It's an aggressive thing when they're competing for the spot. But everybody who's ever run track seems to be saying I've never seen this before. It just seems wildly implausible to say it could be an accident. Did you guys have any context before tonight? First of all, I'm curious.
I had seen it. My mom's a big TikTok, Instagram person now, so she's officially more hip than me. And I actually did run track. I don't know that I could consider myself a track athlete. Definitely didn't do the shorter distances. I my motto is if you can't run fast, just try to run longer. But the thing that I took away from it was that this girl still hadn't apologized. Even if it were still an honest mistake. Apparently, her father's come out and apologized to the family, but she hasn't. Because even in the heat of the moment, sometimes you get caught up, you make a mistake, whether it was intentional or whether it's unintentional. I would think it's something you could easily come back and apologize for, whether you're claiming it was on purpose or not. So it's pretty insane to me. I've never seen anything like it at any level. How about you, Trenton?
Yeah, when I had first saw it, I only saw the angle from the front, and the front looks very intentional. When Blake sent over the content for tonight, I found a new angle from the back that shows the baton getting caught on the other athlete's jersey as she's bringing it up, and
on the victim's jersey,
yes,
if you will.
on
Yeah.
the victim's jersey before.
And that's essentially what the girl said on TV when she was interviewed. I think it was Good Morning America, I believe. Was that, like she said, it had to do with the angles that what they passed each other. Yeah, like I don't know if she said the jersey, but like she had said something to the effect of like that her arm had hit it and caused her arm to kind of fly up, and then when she tried to bring her arm back down to control it, that's when it hit her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
freak things happen. I'm a little suspicious that she isn't able to. Even if you do that by mistake, I think it would be pretty easy to apologize. But I think I read that right in that story, right? That it was only the father who had apologized. Hopefully,
their parents, the parents of the, we're using crime scene language when, she's only just been recently charged with anything, but the parents of the perpetrator had reached out to the victim and her family. But I mean, I guess that is another element to add to this, though. Now that as of, I believe that was just yesterday, whenever that article was from that I sent to you guys, she is now facing a misdemeanor assault charge.
I think some of that comes with where I take issue with the whole thing is why is there a national press tour going on about the event? I feel like it would have been national news for a day and passed under the rug, but it's ongoing. And I guess Minute of Fame take your spotlight, but it's such an interesting way that the story's been handled. That's kind of where my issue is. I mean, heat of the moment, things happen, and freak accidents do happen as well. But kind of the reaction post the incident has been very interesting to see.
So
I got theories on that? Why it still has news value?
Kyle,
I think it's the fact that it's probably that it's going to court means that the families obviously couldn't settle it outside of court would be my guess. But Blake, I do have a question for you. I noticed you've got a treadmill there in the background of your video here. Traditionally, help out at that trolley run. I know our friends Dewey and Brian often do it as well. What would it take for you to swing that baton for the sake of winning a race? I know the trolley run, it's a friendly charity event, but it does have a $1,500 cash prize if you get first place. Would you mistakenly try to pull something like this to win $1,500?
Probably not for $1,500, because then the moment I catch that charge that this girl did, that doesn't even cover my retainer for my attorney. So, I mean,
it could probably earn us a few extra podcast views the next week.
Maybe in intramural flag football, I might get crazy enough once I've been hit a few times. Though of course you're not allowed weapons in that one.
I don't think on in most of these road runs you do either. But I saw that treadmill in the background. You're bringing in running stories, so I figured you were just trying to become a distance athlete yourself now.
I do need to. I mean, I've been trying. I do need to probably get signed up for that trolley run. We skipped out on it last year because it started raining the morning of, and then it ended up being, by the time the race actually started, it ended up being decent weather, I think, so I was kind of bummed out. But
you even got Quentin out there. You left him out high and dry.
I know, and then y'all went to breakfast without me, so who was left high and dry?
If you need a weapon on your runs, metal water bottles often look like batons nowadays, so that's always a...
Yeah. Well, I mean, I carry a baton around all the time anyway, you could say. I mean, I kind of need it. I can't be hitting people with it because if it breaks, then I got no cane to feel the ground in front of me. But
I thought you
could say
something else, but I forgot.
Oh, no.
maybe that's...
I'd be catching a lot more than a misdemeanor assault charge if I pulled that baton out, so...
maybe that's the key is I'll be the guide for you in one of these races, and it'll be a lot harder to accuse you as having, with your cane. They'll maybe give you a little bit more benefit of the doubt than they're giving
Well,
this.
and generally when blind people run and they're guided, they tend to have like a tether system, so they usually don't even have their canes out.
Well, in this scenario, we might need one to win. So I'm
Right,
just
right, true.
thinking of all our scenarios here.
Stick them out sideways and trip everyone that run by you.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, like and then like the concussion can just be because they didn't catch themselves. They didn't work on their core strength. So it's all their fault. We can victim
It's
blame.
the ground's fault. It was the ground.
It was the grounds. That's right.
It's those Kansas City potholes they never fill in.
That is my girlfriend who's behind the scenes, producing this. She living in Kansas City. That's a daily occurrence for us. Every time I think she's swerving to avoid a deer or another car is about to hit us, it's just like, nope, the pothole was half the width of the lane, so I had to swerve around it. It's the worst. We'll probably break an ankle in one of those on the trolley run or something.
For those who don't know, we're all been trying to recruit Blake over to the Kansas side where the roads are smooth, the snow gets plowed up, the salt. It's one of these days we'll make that trip over here. He hadn't quite made it happen yet. Trenton, you're out in Overland Park, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I was disappointed with snow removal this year after all the stories I had heard. Kansas is superior, but hey, maybe it's just a bad year. Maybe I caught it.
Yeah. All have off days, I guess.
All right, boys. Well, appreciate y'all coming on. We kind of threw this together at the last minute, as we found out Quentin was out of town on vacation. But I think we're learning something here. The more the merrier. We got to get the four of us on here. We've got, like I said in the prep thing, we've even got, we could bring a lady's perspective into this as well, as my girlfriend's roommate's a big sports fan and has a lot of opinions on a variety of topics. So we might be bringing in more and more people to do this. So stick with us, and we will talk to you boys again soon.